Night falls across an ancient plain. The air is cool, the stars glimmer like scattered seeds, and somewhere a fire crackles softly. Around it, a small circle of listeners sits, their faces lit by the amber glow. A man with silver hair begins to speak. He tells of mountains that drink the clouds, rivers that can swallow a horse whole, and roads that bend like sleeping snakes across the desert. His voice rises and falls like the wind, and the children lean closer, as if the words themselves are a warmth they can hold in their hands. In this world there are no books, no paper, no ink, no libraries to hold the weight of a civilization's memory, and yet knowledge moves faster than you might imagine. It drifts along caravan trails, it rides on the backs of ships, it hides in the pockets of songs and stories, carried from one mind to another like sparks leaping from fire to fire. Long before libraries, the world was remembered, not written. A map was not drawn on parchment, but sung in a pattern of stars and rivers. A warning about a dangerous storm was not filed in a record, but whispered from a fisherman to a passing traveler. Even the price of salt, the location of distant kingdoms, and the names of forgotten gods were stored not in scrolls, but in the living memories of merchants, priests, and storytellers. Tonight, if you close your eyes, you can imagine traveling through such a world. A desert under a cold moon. A trader approaches from the horizon, leading camels heavy with silk and spices. He greets a shepherd by the well and trades not just goods, but news, which markets are thriving, which villages have water, which mountain passes are safe. The words are short, but the knowledge behind them is vast, an invisible library that grows and shifts with every telling. This is the story of how humanity shared its wisdom before the first library was ever built. It is a journey through memory, across deserts and oceans, through songs and myths, where knowledge is alive, fragile, and endlessly moving. Long before the first library doors ever opened, before ink met paper, and before human hands could leaf through pages of history, the world was already full of memory. Not the memory of books, or shelves, or scrolls, but the living, breathing memory of people. Imagine a village under a wide open sky. There are no lanterns, no stone buildings yet, only huts made of reeds and clay. When night falls, the world turns into a great dome of darkness, pricked by countless stars. Children gather near the center of the village, where a single fire burns. The air is cool and carries the faint smell of smoke and earth. From the shadows, an elder steps forward. His hair is as white as moonlight, and his voice, when he speaks, seems to belong to the earth itself. He begins to tell the story of the river, the one that curves like a snake just beyond the hills. He speaks of where it comes from, of the fish that hide under its stones, and of the spirits that guard its crossing. The children listen without a word. Some close their eyes to imagine the river flowing. Others trace the air with their fingers, following the elder's gestures. For these children, this story is the library. It is the only record they have. If the elder does not speak, the river's secrets will vanish into the night. In the age before libraries, the world's knowledge was alive. It did not sit quietly on shelves, waiting to be found. It walked in the footsteps of those who remembered it. It traveled from mouth to ear, from heart to heart. Every elder, every trader, every traveler was a moving page, a walking book, a single shelf in the vast human library. Across many lands, there were people whose entire lives were dedicated to memory. In West Africa, the griots carried the lineages of kings and the histories of villages. They sang their knowledge in verses, repeating names, victories, and warnings, until the sound itself became a fortress against forgetting. In northern Europe, the bards of Celtic tribes kept their people's myths alive in song, while far across the icy lands of Siberia, shamans whispered the paths to sacred places, remembering them not in maps, but in journeys, rituals, and dreams. No, one carried books, because books did not yet exist. The only library was memory itself, fragile, precious, and passed from generation to generation, like an ember that had to be protected from the wind. If you could wander through this world, you would hear knowledge drifting like smoke from one village to the next. A hunter returns from the forest and tells of a tree that bears sweet fruit. A traveler arrives from far away, carrying a story of a flood that swallowed an entire valley. Each story is a fragment, a page, a clue to understanding the wider world. And yet they are not written. Instead, the human voice is the pen, and the listener's mind is the parchment. Think of how delicate that system must have been. A single forgotten story could erase the location of a water source. A single misremembered direction could lead a caravan into the desert. And yet, this was how our ancestors survived. They memorized the world, and in doing so, they became living. Libraries, walking across plains, deserts, and seas, the beginning of knowledge often started at night. The dark brought people together around the fire, where words could travel further than the light. Songs were easier to remember than plain speech, so history was often sung, its rhythm helping the mind hold on to every syllable a melody could. Carry the names of rivers, the turns of a mountain path, or the warning of a dangerous animal that hunted under the moon. Sometimes, the stories were more than just memory, they were maps. The first peoples of Australia, for instance, created songlines, paths across their vast lands that could be followed through music. Each verse described a rock, a tree, a stream, or a hill, and by singing the song in order, a traveler could walk safely through hundreds of miles of open land. To hear one of these songs was to hold a map in your mind, and to forget it was to risk being lost forever. In this fragile, beautiful world, every person mattered. When an elder died without passing on their knowledge, it was like a library burning to the ground. A forgotten song could mean the disappearance of an entire people's history, and yet, for thousands of years, humanity lived this way, holding the universe in nothing more than memory and voice. The wind moves gently over the grasslands. In the distance, the sun lifts over the horizon, and mist coils around the trees like a soft veil. The world is waking, and with it, so are the keepers of memory. Every community had someone whose role was to remember. Some were elders with long white hair, their voices steady as stone. Others were singers, dancers, or priests, whose rituals carried the past into the present. Their duty was sacred, to keep the world alive through words. Imagine an early morning in a small fishing village. The sea is calm, silvered with the light of dawn. A group of young men prepares their boats, pushing them gently into the water. Before they leave, the oldest fisherman steps forward. He points to the horizon, where the sky meets the sea, and recites a poem that is also a map. Past the reef where the white birds gather. Follow the sun until it touches the dark mountain. When the wind smells of pine, turn north to find the island of many stones. The young fishermen nod. They know this verse by heart. They have sung it since childhood, just as their fathers and grandfathers did. To forget even one line could mean losing their way in the vastness of the ocean. All across the world, knowledge moved in rhythm. Rhythm was the key to memory. A story told plainly could slip from the mind like water from a hand, but a story set to rhythm, to repetition, to melody, that story could live for centuries. In the distant north, Viking skalds recited the sagas of their people, describing journeys across icy seas, battles with storms and spirits. Each name, each place, each event was a thread in the great tapestry of memory. The rhythm of the verse made it unbreakable. Far away in the deserts of North Africa, Berber guides taught young travelers to navigate endless dunes by reciting a chain of landmarks, a particular red rock shaped like a sleeping camel, a lone acacia tree, a cluster of dark hills. Each clue was held in a story, and each story turned the empty desert into a remembered map. In this era, to listen was as important as to speak. A child who sat by the fire and listened with care was gathering the building blocks of survival. Listening was not passive, was learning the world, and so nights around the fire were more than comfort. They were school, library, and museum all at once. The flames flickered like the turning of pages, and the voice of the storyteller was the only guide into the vast and unseen. Sometimes, stories carried not just practical knowledge, but the soul of a people. They explained why the river curved a certain way, why the stars moved in their silent dance, why a hill or a forest was sacred. A myth might seem like a simple tale about gods or animals, but hidden within it was a memory key, which seasons too, plant crops, which wines to fear, which paths were safe. For example, in the islands of Polynesia, navigators learned to read the ocean itself. They memorized the shapes of waves, the flight of birds, and the color of the water, turning the sea into a book written in movement and light. Their chants preserved routes across thousands of miles of open water without a single piece of parchment. To guide them, the beauty of this world was also its fragility. If a storm swept away a village, or if an elder died unexpectedly, entire chapters of memory could vanish. Imagine a mountain valley, where a single family knows the safe path through a dangerous pass. If they are gone, the pass is gone too, lost not in the earth, but in the human mind. And yet, despite this fragility, human memory proved astonishingly strong. Whole epics like the Mahabharata or Odyssey were carried for generations before they were ever written down. They survived because their rhythms were like footsteps, each word following the next with a steady, unforgettable beat. As day turns to dusk, another fire crackles to life. The circle of listeners returns. Tonight, the storyteller is not an elder, but a young woman with a clear, soft voice. She has learned the stories well, and now it is her turn to become the library. She begins with a song about the mountains in the east. Each verse describes a spring, a cave, or a ridge. The listeners close their eyes and walk the mountains in their minds. In their imagination, each stone and tree finds its place, building a map that will guide them long after she is finished. Singing. To live in this world was to be woven into the story of the earth. Every river you drank from, every trail you walked, every star you followed, all of it lived in memory. A quiet library in the mind and heart, and slowly across centuries. These living libraries would prepare humanity for a new era and age, when memory would leave the body and take root in ink and clay, turning stories into objects that could survive the silence of forgetting. But that is still far ahead. Here, in the quiet before libraries, the world is alive with voices, and every voice is a page. As twilight deepens and the first stars appear, the rhythm of life in this ancient world slows again. The day's work fades into the soft hum of evening, and across hills, plains, and islands, humanity begins to remember in the distance. Smoke curls lazily into the sky. Somewhere another fire is lit, and once more the quiet ritual of storytelling begins. Before libraries, before written words, the night was the classroom. It was under the cover of darkness that the mind could travel furthest. With no walls, no ink, and no paper, stories themselves became architecture. A well-told tale could be walked through like a temple. Each image, each rhythm, each pause was a pillar or a doorway that led deeper into memory. In many parts of the world, people built memory palaces without even knowing the term. A hunter might imagine each rock and tree along a trail as a part of a song. A farmer might remember planting seasons by linking them to the phases of the moon. And a child, just beginning to learn, might turn the sky into a map by connecting the dots of the constellations to familiar stories. A bear, a fish, a hero, or a wandering spirit. One of the most beautiful things about this world of memory was its shared nature. Knowledge rarely belonged to one person alone. A single story could be carried by dozens of voices, each adding a subtle detail, or removing one that no longer felt true. In a mountain village, an elder might speak of a great storm that came generations ago. When a traveler from the next valley repeats the tale, the storm grows larger, darker, wilder. By the time it reaches the coast, it has become a myth of gods and spirits. A warning told to children as they watched the horizon for clouds. Story shifted and breathed like the living world they described. This was both a strength and a weakness. The fluid nature of oral memory meant that knowledge could travel great distances, but it could also transform along the way. Imagine now that you are walking along a river at dusk. The water reflects the last light of the sun. Somewhere in the reeds, a bird calls softly. You follow the sound until you find a small group of people kneeling by the bank. An old woman hums a tune, her fingers tracing shapes in the sand. She is teaching the young ones the song of the river crossings, how to find shallow water, how to avoid the deep pools where crocodiles wait, and where to step safely on the stones. She points to the water, and then to the sky, connecting the course of the river to the pattern of the stars. When the children hum the song back to her, they are not just learning a melody, they are building a map in their minds, a map that will keep them alive long after she is gone. Across the oceans, in lands of ice and snow, another form of memory thrives. Here, in the cold, words can travel as far as the wind carries them. A hunter crouches in a white landscape, his breath rising in the still air. He listens, not just for animals, but for the stories of the land. His elders taught him to read the snow like a scroll, a curve in the drift, a pattern in the ice, the angle of the wind. Even the way the aurora shimmers in the sky carries meaning, a sign of weather, of direction, a story written in light. The hunter hums a short, steady tune as he walks, each verse reminding him where to step, which lakes are frozen solid, and which are dangerous. For him, the world itself is the library, and every step he takes is a word in its silent, endless story. The fragility of memory in this age gave life a kind of sacred rhythm. A day was not just for living, it was for keeping the world alive. In thought and speech, when the harvest came, songs of planting and reaping were sung loudly. so that the next generation could hear them carried on the wind. When travelers arrived, they were invited to sit by the fire and share their stories, because every story from afar was a new page for the village library. Even small, simple knowledge mattered deeply. A new herb found in the forest could heal or harm, and its description had to be remembered perfectly. The color of its leaves, the smell of its flowers, the way it grew near a certain stone or tree, all became part of the story that ensured its survival. Picture now an island at the edge of the sea. The tide is low, revealing a path of stones between two shores. A grandmother walks across it with her granddaughter, the girl's hand small and warm in her own. She does not rush. Each step is a lesson. This is the stone shaped like a turtle. She whispers, "This is the one that looks like a sleeping bird." The girl repeats the name softly, and by the time they reach the other side, she has memorized the path that will one day save her life. And so, for thousands of years, humanity lived like this, moving through a world made of living memory. Every story was a tool, a guide, a seed. Every song was a map, a warning, a record of love and loss. The earth itself seemed to speak, and human voices answered, keeping its memory alive. The fires burn, the stars watch in silence, and the whispers of the living library drift into the night. When the first light touches the horizon, a lone figure begins to walk. He is a trader, his cloak dusty, his sandals thin, and his memory heavy with knowledge. In the age before libraries, before books and scrolls, travelers were the carriers of the world's wisdom. They were living pages, moving between villages and kingdoms, bringing not just goods, but stories. The walking library's a merchant crossing a desert carries more than salt or spices. He carries maps in his mind, maps of dunes, oases, and the rare wells hidden by the sand. He remembers which village trades grain, which valley offers wool, and which mountain pass freezes early in winter. No one writes these things down. If he forgets, the journey could mean death. If he remembers, he becomes the bridge between worlds. Sometimes, when night falls, he sits by a foreign fire, sharing food with strangers who are also travelers. One speaks of a new market in a distant town. Another warns of a river that has flooded its banks. A third hums a short, repetitive song that marks the distance between wells on a caravan trail by morning. Each of them remembers a little more than yesterday. Each of them carries a bigger library inside their mind. The caravan trails of memory crossed the great deserts and mountains. Trade routes became the invisible threads of knowledge. The Silk Road, long before it ever had a name, was already a library without walls. Imagine a caravan of camels swaying gently across a golden sea of sand. Each animal carries sacks of goods, but each person carries something even more valuable: the memory of what lies beyond the horizon. A trader from the east tells of a city where bronze bells are cast so perfectly they can sing for minutes after being struck. Another shares the rumor of a herb in the mountains that can heal fevers and soothe the mind. And somewhere among the hum of voices and the soft pad of camel feet, someone remembers a map of stars that shows the way to a hidden oasis. No books change hands. No scrolls or letters pass between them, and yet knowledge flows like water, seeping into every corner of the connected world. The power of the spoken map before written maps. The world was a puzzle of sounds and stories. A sailor might describe an island by its smell, sweet like flowers, or sharp like sulfur. A desert guide might measure distance in songs. 3 songs to the next well, 2 more to the valley of stones. These oral maps were fragile but precise. They relied on repetition and ritual. To forget a line in a song was to lose the path forever. Among the Polynesian navigators, long before Europeans ever set sail across the Pacific, sailors memorized entire oceans through chants. Each island was a verse, each current a rhythm, each constellation a chorus. To listen to such a song was to hold a sea in your mind, as vast and infinite as the night sky itself. Markets as memory hubs, if trade routes were the veins of knowledge. Markets were its beating heart. In the center of a bustling ancient town, people gather in a sunlit square. There are baskets of figs and olives, pots of honey, spices that perfume the air with the scent of faraway lands. But if you listen closely, the true exchange is in the voices. A farmer learns from a traveler that the northern hills are full of wild goats this season. A potter hears of a new glaze from a distant river valley. A fisherman tells a visiting merchant about a storm that destroyed half the boats on the western coast. Each fragment of knowledge will travel with someone else by nightfall, and by the next full moon, the story will have reached a place hundreds of miles away. In this way, the world without libraries still remembered itself, through a network of moving, speaking, and listening human beings. The fragile web of oral trade, yet this system had its risks. Unlike a written page, a human mind can forget, or change, or embellish. A merchant might confuse two valleys with similar rivers. A sailor might misremember which star marks the safe harbor. One mistake could cost lives, and yet it was the only system humanity had. For this reason, trust became the foundation of knowledge. Reputation was everything. A traveler who lied or forgot too often would find no one willing to trade or listen. The oral network of knowledge was not just fragile, it was alive. It depended on human connection, on voices meeting in the quiet of night, on memories carefully passed like gifts from one soul to another as the sun sets on another day of travel. The lone merchant in the desert finds a caravan already camped by a small fire. He approaches, tired but smiling, because he knows what awaits: food, warmth, and stories. Tonight, he will add new pages to his invisible library, a warning of bandits on a distant road, a tale of a festival in a faraway city, a rumor of a king who builds a palace of mirrors. The desert wind carries the voices softly, and above them the stars turn like ancient, silent guardians of memory. Night has fallen over a distant port city. The sea glimmers like black glass under the moon, and in the harbor ships sway gently, their wooden hulls creaking with the tide. On the shore, merchants and sailors gather around small fires. They share food, laughter, and most importantly, stories. Some of these stories are about storms and safe harbors. Others speak of kingdoms that rise and fall beyond the horizon. But hidden in each tale are fragments of knowledge, secrets of wind and water, markets and mountains. In a world without books, every story is a vessel. It carries truth, warning, memory, and it sails from one shore to another, changing shape as it moves. Legends as libraries, long before history was written. Humanity remembered itself in legends. A fisherman might tell his son about the great sea serpent that coils beneath the waves near a dangerous reef. To outsiders, it is just a tale, but to those who know, it is a map disguised as a myth, a warning to stay clear of the sharp rocks that lurk just below the water in the vast deserts. Travelers speak of a ghost city that vanishes into sandstorms, without a trace. Those who listen carefully understand the truth. This is a memory of a caravan lost to the winds, a reminder that the dunes can swallow a life in a single night. By turning knowledge into story, humans made memory easier to carry. A list of facts could be forgotten. A song about a serpent or a ghost city could live for centuries. The songs that walk across the green hills of Europe. Bards walked from one village to another, their harps or lyres in hand. They sang of heroes, battles, and journeys, but woven. Between the verses were real directions, weather signs, and moral lessons. A song about a hero climbing a mountain might secretly hold the sequence of valleys and rivers that lead to a sacred spring. A ballad of a king's lost crown might teach which star to follow in the dead of night. Songs were not just entertainment, they were walking memory codes. In the islands of the Pacific, songs became entire maps of the sea. A navigator might teach his apprentice a long chant that named the swells of the ocean, the colors of the water at different depths, and the patterns of bird flight that signaled land. Each note was a compass, each rhythm a direction. To forget the song was to be lost forever, but to carry it was to hold an ocean in the mind. Stories that grow as they travel, as knowledge moved along trade routes. Stories grew like vines, twisting and adapting to new soil. A tale that began as a fisherman's warning could become, after hundreds of miles, a myth of sea monsters and enchanted islands. A memory of a distant mountain pass could turn into a hero's trial, where he must face the stone guardian and frozen river. Simply poetic. Names for real hazards. These layered stories were more than entertainment. They were survival wrapped in imagination. Even if the details shifted, the core knowledge often remained: which roads to take, which storms to avoid, which lands were safe or dangerous. The invisible network of Menmoyef. You could float high above the world in those ancient days. You would see a web of human voices stretching across continents, caravans carrying silk and spices through the deserts, fishermen in small boats whispering about currents and reefs, villagers huddled around fires, passing down the names of rivers, plants, and sacred hills. There are no libraries here, no scrolls, no written contracts, and yet the world remembers itself because human beings are talking, singing, and listening. The fragility and strength of oral knowledge. This system was delicate. One war, one famine, or one broken chain of memory could erase lifetimes of wisdom, yet was also astonishingly resilient. Think of the great epics, the Iliad and Odyssey, the Mahabharata, the Dreamtime stories of Aboriginal Australia. These were not written first. They lived in voices for generations, carried by memory alone. Even across oceans and deserts, songs and myths survived like seeds on the wind. Because for ancient people, to forget was to risk survival, and to remember was to keep the world alive. A night at the crossroads. Picture a lonely crossroads at the edge of a forest. A merchant from the south has stopped to rest. He lights a small fire and warms his hands. Soon a shepherd appears, leading his flock. They share bread and sit quietly. The merchant speaks first. He tells of a river that has flooded far to the east, cutting off the trade route for weeks. The shepherd nods slowly, and in exchange, he shares a local story about a spirit in the nearby mountains, a tale that warns travelers never to cross during the first full moon of spring. The merchant smiles, for he understands the hidden message. The snowmelt is strongest then, and the rivers are too dangerous to cross. By morning, he will carry this knowledge northward, and perhaps he will tell it as a story to another traveler, who will pass it along once more. The web of human memory continues to grow, one fire, one voice, one story at a time. A cold wind moves through the valley. The fire has burned low, and the last sparks float into the dark sky. Somewhere beyond the hills, a wolf howls, and the small circle of listeners draws closer together. They do not know it yet, but this night will be remembered differently by each of them. When memory shifts, human memory is alive, and like all living things, it changes. A story told today is not always the same tomorrow. A fisherman might forget the number of rocks near the reef. A trader might confuse which mountain pass freezes first in winter. A child might hear a hero's name slightly wrong, and that name will carry forward into the next generations. Song's memory flows like water. It can nourish, but it can also erode and reshape the truth. The slow drift of knowledge over time. Even the strongest oral traditions begin to drift. A song that once taught the exact sequence of rivers and valleys might turn into a simpler story about a wandering hero. The details, the vital directions fade first. Then the reason behind the story fades too. The tale of the ghost city in the desert might begin as a memory of a caravan lost to a sandstorm. Centuries later, it is told as a cautionary myth about angry spirits. The lesson is still there. Beware the desert winds. But the practical details have been swallowed by the sands of time. The fragility of a living library, a world that relies only on memory, is beautiful and dangerous. Imagine a coastal village struck by a sudden storm. The waves rise, the wind screams, and in one night, the elder who remembers the safe harbors is gone. The next season, young sailors launch their boats without the full knowledge of which coves offer shelter. One storm becomes two, and soon an entire chain of memory is broken. It is as if a library burned down, but the library was human minds, and the ashes are silence. When knowledge disappears, history is full of gaps, spaces where memory failed to cross the river of time. Whole civilizations left no written record, only faint echoes in the stories of neighboring peoples. Archaeologists uncover their walls and tools, but the names, the songs, the wisdom of the land, all have drifted away like smoke. A lost language is more than lost words. It is the collapse of a memory system, the closing of a library that no one can ever open again. The balance of memory and imagination in the era before writing. Humanity lived in a delicate balance. Memory needed imagination to survive. Stories had to be interesting enough to remember, so they grew larger, brighter, and more magical with every retelling. But imagination could also betray the memory. A myth that once warned of a seasonal flood might, generations later, become a tale of an immortal fish god, its practical message buried under layers of wonder. And yet, this was how the world remembered itself, through living stories, always shifting, always alive. The last night without writing. Imagine, for a moment, a final gathering before the age of writing. A community sits in a circle, faces lit by the orange glow of fire. An elder lifts his hand for silence, and the crowd listens to the history of their people. A river of names, battles, journeys, and lessons that stretches back further than anyone can count. The youngest children listen in awe. They do not know that they are the next pages of the library. If they forget, the story ends. The whisper of change far away, in another valley, someone scratches a mark into wet clay. It is not a story, yet only a tally, a count of grain. But this simple mark is a spark, a seed that will grow into a new way to remember. Clay, stone, and ink will soon become an extension of the human mind. Knowledge will no longer live in voices alone, but in this moment, before the written age fully dawns. The world is still a living library, a fragile, wandering collection of songs, myths, and memories. The winds of time carry the stories onward, sometimes whole, sometimes broken, sometimes transformed into something new. A story lost, a story reborn one evening. A lone traveler reaches a village he has never seen. He is tired, hungry, and carrying a story in his heart. He begins to tell it by the fire, a story of a distant mountain and the hidden spring that saved his caravan. He remembers most of the details, but leaves out one turn in the path. A young boy listens, wide-eyed, and repeats the tale the next morning to his friends. They remember the spring, but the mountain's shape becomes rounder in their telling. By the time the story reaches the next valley, it has become a legend of a magic lake, its practical directions fading like mist in the morning sun. Yet, in this way, knowledge continues to walk the earth, transformed but never truly gone. The turning of the page humanity has always feared forgetting. Perhaps that fear is why our ancestors spoke so much, sang so loudly, and wove their wisdom into stories that could outlive their voices. As centuries pass, the first written words will appear. The living library will begin to share its burden with clay tablets and scrolls, and yet something will always remain in the old way, in the firelit songs, the whispered myths, the human heart that remembers what paper cannot. The night grows quiet again. Somewhere, a storyteller finishes their tale, and the listeners close their eyes. The story drifts into their dreams, another fragile thread in the vast invisible web that once held the whole world together. Dawn creeps gently over the horizon. The last stars fade, and mist rises from the rivers. Somewhere, a village stirs awake, and a lone storyteller yawns beside the dying fire. He has done his work. The children will remember his story, at least. He hopes they will dot the first shadows of writing for thousands of years. Memory alone carried the world. But one day, somewhere in Mesopotamia, a farmer pressed a reed into soft clay. It was not poetry or history, just a mark for counting grain. But this mark was a turning point. What had lived only in the mind could now take root in the physical world. A tally could survive a winter storm. A mark could outlive the memory of the man who made it. Slowly, humanity began to realize that a mark could be more than a number. It could be a name, a warning, a story. From voice to clay, imagine a bustling market in a riverside city. Merchants unload baskets of dates, jars of oil, and rolls of cloth. Each one carries a library in his mind, but the city scribes are watching with keen eyes. When a trader sells his grain, a scribe takes a small tablet of clay and presses tiny wedges into its surface. To most people, these are just marks, mysterious scratches on mud. But to the scribe, it is a memory frozen in time. The living library of voices is slowly learning to leave a shadow behind. The coexistence of memory and writing at first. Writing does not replace memory. It walks beside it like a younger companion. Elders still tell stories by firelight. Bards still carry songs across the hills. Navigators still chant the paths of the sea. But now a new kind of permanence begins to whisper. If you carve my marks, I will not forget. I will remember for you. The hidden cost of forgetting yet even as writing begins to bloom. Some knowledge slips away. A scribe can record how many sheep were sold, but he cannot capture the smell of the desert wind or the taste of a river at springtime. He can record the story of a king, but the way his voice rumbled in the market square will vanish when the last witness is gone. The living library and the written library each hold different pieces of the world. One is fragile but full of soul. The other is durable but distant. The last great travelers of memory as writing spreads. Some people cling fiercely to the old ways. Bards, shamans, and storytellers become the guardians of the unrecorded. They keep alive the songs of rivers and forests, the warnings about winds and stars, the myths that do not fit into neat clay marks. Picture a caravan stopping in a town with a new stone tablet on its gate. The merchant bows to the scribe, but at night, by the fire, he still sings the old roots to his children. The world is changing, but the echo of memory does not vanish so quickly. The first libraries are born eventually. Clay becomes scrolls, and scrolls become shelves. A king in a distant city builds a hall to store every story he can capture in writing. But even these early libraries depend on the living memory outside their walls. Messengers, merchants, and sailors still bring the knowledge that fills their shelves. Without the living web of voices, a library is just an empty room. The memory of the earth, even as the written word spreads, some things remain unwritten. The path of a river through a forest, the call of a bird that signals rain, the hum of a chant that guides a canoe under the stars. These are libraries that live in experience, that cannot be carved or inked. In this way, the world before libraries never truly disappears. It lives on in the things we still feel, the rhythms that still move through us. A quiet farewell to the age of living memory. Picture one last night before the fire. The storyteller sits with his listeners, aware, somehow, that the world is changing. He speaks slowly, his voice carrying the weight of generations. Remember the river's song. Remember the hill that looks like a sleeping bear. Remember the ghost city in the desert. The clay will remember the names, but only you can remember the way. The children nod, their eyes wide in the flickering light beyond the circle of fire. The first libraries of stone and clay wait silently for the dawn. The fire has burned low, and the first light of dawn paints the sky in soft gold and pale pink. Somewhere a rooster calls, and the world of night, the world of stories and memory, slowly gives way to the day. We leave behind the voices that carried the world for so long. They have walked with us across deserts, sailed with us over endless seas, and whispered to us beneath the stars. But now, a new way of remembering has begun to wake with the sun. A world on the edge of change. Imagine standing in the courtyard of an early city. The stone walls are warm in the morning light. In the corner, a scribe kneels over a slab of clay, pressing careful marks with a reed stylus. A child watches wide-eyed. He has heard stories by the fire his entire life, but this is different. The marks are silent, and yet they promise to remember without a voice. Somewhere, far from here, a storyteller wakes and begins his day. He does not know that the age of living memory is slowly sharing its burden with these new, quiet symbols, the gentle fade of the living library for thousands of years. Human memory has carried the shape of the earth. It has followed the river. Bends marked the hidden springs, and mapped the sky with constellations of meaning, even as clay tablets and scrolls appear. The living library does not vanish overnight. It softly lingers, like mist on a lake before the morning sun. Bards still sing of heroes and storms. Navigators still chant the names of waves and winds. And elders still whisper to children about the hills, the stars, and the paths that lead home. But now the voices are joined by echoes in clay and ink. A quieter form of memory that will survive even when lips fall silent. A memory that outlives its keeper. There is a quiet beauty in this moment of change. In the age of pure oral tradition, a person's death meant the loss of an entire library. A song could vanish in a single winter. A map of rivers and valleys could disappear with one forgotten elder. But now, for the first time, knowledge can outlive the memory of its keeper. A clay tablet can hold a message long after the voice is gone. A scroll can cross an ocean without needing to be sung. And yet, the heartbeat of memory still lingers, because even with writing, words are just marks until someone remembers how to read them. Between two worlds as the day brightens, we can almost feel the two worlds overlapping. The old world, where every hill and river is alive in a song or a story. The new world, where lines on clay and ink on papyrus will carry memory across generations. Both worlds are fragile, and both depend on care, attention, and love. Some knowledge, like the smell of the desert wind, or the way moonlight dances on the sea, will always belong to the living library. It cannot be trapped in clay or stone, but the names of kings, the weight of harvests, and the long stories of journeys across the earth will now rest in two places at once, in memory, and in the gentle permanence of written words. The sun has risen fully now, casting long, golden shadows across the ancient streets. The fires of the night are only embers, and the soft murmur of morning life begins to replace the hush of storytelling. The age of living memory slowly bows to the age of writing. But it does not disappear. Instead, it lives alongside the new, like a soft echo in the distance. A gentle companion that hums in the background of human history. Whispers beneath the words when you step into the first libraries. You can almost hear the ghost of the living library breathing between the shelves. A clay tablet etched with grain tallies, carries a silent memory of the farmer who first counted his harvest. A scroll of a king's decree echoes with the voices of messengers who once spoke it aloud in crowded streets. Even in the quiet of the library, the world of voices, songs, and shared stories still lingers in the shadows. Every written word is a frozen whisper of a voice that once lived. The dream of eternal memory humanity has always dreamed of never forgetting. The living library was fleeting, like clouds shifting in the wind. Writing promised a new kind of permanence, a memory that would not fade when the storyteller slept. And yet, even this permanence is a dream. Clay can crumble, scrolls can burn, stone can break. What lasts forever is not the shape of the letters, but the desire to remember, the quiet ritual of passing the world from one soul to another. The night that lives ANF, you close your eyes now. You can almost return to that first, endless library, the library without walls, without shelves, without doors. You can hear the desert wind carrying the songs of caravans, the sea singing with the voices of navigators, the crackle of fire as elders whisper about rivers and hills. You can feel the rhythm of a world that was once remembered in hearts alone, and even as the first libraries rise, with their clay and papyrus and stone, this living library never truly leaves us. It hides in the songs we still hum, in the stories we tell before sleep, in the memory of a place that feels like home even if we have never been there. The gentle invitation to re-stars, we close this journey. The voices of the ancient world drift into quiet. The stars that once guided sailors now fade behind the brightness of day, and the soft hum of life continues, calm and unhurried. The stories will wait for you in clay, in ink, and in the echoes of memory. The world has always remembered itself, and tonight it will remember you. So breathe deeply. Let the weight of the day slip away like a caravan disappearing over the golden dunes. Close your eyes. The library without walls is still here, singing softly in the background of time, and you are safe within it.